Luckiest man alive. Good evening. This is Tuesday, November 14th, 2023 at 5:05 p.m. I am Council President Nick J. Mosby, here reconvening the committee as a whole on the public hearing on City Council Bill 22-0195, as well as City Council Bill 23-0369. In the council chambers, we have a packed room. Thank you to all the advocates as well as stakeholders have been involved in this process throughout the past couple of months. From the City Council, we have to my left Councilman Zeke Cohen, Chairman John Bullock, Councilman Chris Burnett, the sponsor of both bills, Councilwoman Odette Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. President.
To my right, Madam Vice President Sharon Green Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Chairman Mark Conway, Chairman Eric Costello, and Councilwoman Felicia Porter. Today we have holding us down, facilitating this event is Mr. Larry Green from Council Services, and we also have Nathan Poole on behalf of the Baltimore City Council President's Office. We're going to go and allow all the members of the city administration to introduce themselves. Just from a housekeeping perspective, Chairman Costello has a really important community meeting on public safety, so he will not be here the entire time, but we truly appreciate you coming and participating at the beginning of tonight's hearing. With that, starting to my left with Stephanie, if you could announce your name and the agency in which you're in for.
Sure, thank you, Council President. Stephanie Murdoch, Director of Legislative Services for Baltimore City DHCD.
Good evening, Stacy Freed, Executive Advisor to the Commissioner, Baltimore City DHCD.
Mr. Sinemy.
Hi, Bob Senemy, Deputy Finance Director representing Department of Finance.
Good evening. Nina Themlis, Director of the Mayor's Office of Government Relations.
Hello, good evening. Marvin Matthew James, Mayor's Chief of Staff.
Crystal Hypelide, representing the Housing Authority of Baltimore City.
Hillary Ruley from the Law Department.
Tyler Shanella, Office of Equity and Civil Rights.
Thank you so much. We also have been joined tonight from Councilman Torrance from the 7th District. We are here today on 22-0195 as well as 23-0369 in the name of inclusionary housing. I think that it's fitting to talk about kind of the history of why we're here today, but in the time frame of 17 years, which inclusionary housing policy has been in the city of Baltimore, only 37 units have been created, which is shameful as it relates to the development that we've seen in our city over the years, particularly as it relates to the public investment in development that we've seen in our city over those years. And, you know, when we talk at the heart and core of where we are, particularly Baltimore and its very trying times in history with real estate and segregation, we understand and know that as we continue to grow mixed communities in our city, as we continue to go after economic apartheid that has been created by failed policies, that we're only creating a better Baltimore not only today, but more importantly for tomorrow. So we wanted to have a very substantive process, and I think over the past several months, there's been hundreds and hundreds of discussions, certainly been plenty city council as a whole meetings, but you know, I think that what we have today and some of the amendments in the package, we can all be proud of. We can assure that we are trying to drive a product that is taking the city from a fiscal perspective at heart, but more importantly, we're getting to the heart of the issue of ensuring that residents throughout the city of Baltimore have access to all of Baltimore, and that we are factoring that in mind. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the sponsor of the bill, Councilwoman Odette Ramos, to open us up with any opening remarks that she might have.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to thank my colleagues for being here this evening and for continuing to engage in the discussions over the last 18 to 20 months on this bill. I just want to take a moment to go over the package that everyone sees here before them. I do want to make sure that we know that we did take input from the development community, the administration, advocates, many of you as well, and the Council President's Office as well. I do think that this has been a true team effort, and we took the time to get this right because we needed to. Now, there isn't full-on agreement, so you'll hear about that today. But I do think that we have a great bill, thanks to everybody's input on it as well. One of the main reasons that the 2007 legislation, which was deemed inclusionary legislation, did not do well and only produced 34 units was because there were waivers. And many of those developments who would have had to, comply with inclusionary were able to get waivers because of the way that the bill was written, basically as the city would have to pay for the actual unit. And so that is, one of the things that ended up happening was that the city did not have the funding. So this bill is very, very different. From the very beginning, when we introduced it February of 2022, and the tax credit in March of 2023, we had a lot of things that we needed to make sure were different. One big one is there are no waivers. This is a requirement. For rental units or rental buildings of 20 or more units, the requirement is if you're already getting subsidy, you have to set aside 10% of the units for 60% of AMI. According to the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development data, that is about $67,000 for a family of 4. It is $53,600 for a family of 2, just to give you a perspective of what the income is that we're talking about here. And then there is, if there's additional subsidy available, we want to make sure that there's housing for 50% of AMI or below. The bill is citywide. We wanted to make sure that communities across the city could take advantage of this opportunity for inclusionary and intentional mixed income communities. In terms of process, this whole process starts at the permit application when an inclusionary plan also has to be submitted. We also worked with DHCD on the Inclusionary Housing Board. The Inclusionary Housing Board is important because that is one of the many places where there is accountability and transparency. So the board is 9 members with Office of Equity Director will be an ex officio member, making it 10. We also added in this new set of amendments that there would be 2 renters and not just 1. The last version of the bill that you saw had affordability at the affordability period for 30 years, and that the time would restart after if there was a sale of the building. That is no longer the case in the amendments before you. The affordability period is 30 years, and after that time period, the city or designated nonprofits may have the right of first refusal to keep those units affordable. This is similar to how the low-income housing tax credits and other types of subsidies for affordable housing are considered. The legislation is meant to be a floor and not a ceiling, so if there is a TIF or some other type of subsidy that's being considered by the council, we can always negotiate up. We did, in this version, also include that there would be, after 3 years of the program or 400 inclusionary units developed, that there would be a study triggered that would help us understand the impact of the program and of the tax credit, and allow for changes to be made in the legislation as a result. There's a lot of reporting. There are annual hearings just to make sure that we are doing this correctly. And again, there are no waivers and no alternatives where you could pay into a fund that then has the units built off-site. The tax credit is very different than what you saw originally. Originally, you saw the tax credit as a 15% flat tax credit that frankly would only work in the core and strong areas of the city. And it was very important to many members of the council that this be available citywide. So the formula has changed and frankly is a model for how I think, and I'll speak for myself, that we should be doing tax credits and reforming our current tax credits. It is actual math and not just a percentage, where what we're saying is this tax credit is the difference between the market rate rent that would be charged and the 60% of AMI rent that would be charged. For a family of 2, that would be $1,300. For a family of 4, it would be $1,600. That's still too high, frankly, but we'll leave that alone. And so that gap between the two, what happens is that the development would basically have that loss or that subsidy, well, I'll just call it the loss, that difference. And then at the end of the year, so between January and December, they would account for that difference. And then at the end of the year, the reporting is such that it would be submitted to the Department of Finance on January 15th so that the July tax bill that they get would have less that amount on the tax bill. So it is still a tax credit, but it has all kinds of accountability. It's also not by right. They still have to apply for it and make sure that they're following all of the inclusionary rules in order to get the tax credit. So we did it as a tax credit to make sure that it would be funded, because just having an allocation in the budget would mean that at some point in time, we may cut it. We don't want to, but it may have to be. So doing a tax credit makes sure that the Department of Finance just understands that that revenue just isn't there for that fiscal year, as we do with all of our other tax credits. So that is how that works, and it is concurrent with the requirements, the affordability requirements of the bill. And so in the original bill, it had 15%, or excuse me, a 15-year credit. This is a 30-year credit. So some of the things that you might hear today, colleagues, is that there is a need to have a fixed cap, that at the end of, by the time we produce 400 units or 3 years, that we would pause the program and reevaluate while still funding those units. That is not what the bill says. It does allow for a study to occur so that we can reevaluate, but that more units would still accumulate during that time. We could change it in 3 years, in 5 years, but that is what is occurring at the moment. The other piece is about funding. Yes, the city has a funding crisis. We are going to be starting this year in a not good position. The challenge here is that last year, we also started in a not so good position. And we were able to find, and lots of agencies had to do what they needed to do, to cut their budgets, to make things work. We weren't able to do some things this year, maybe we'll do things next year, but we never, ever cut the budget for the tax credits. that $38 million that goes for the high performance tax credit or the brownfields credit or others stayed. So when we think about the tax credits and using this as a tax credit to make sure that at least the city knows that we don't have that revenue, we cannot say, well, we don't have the money and we need a funding source, but we didn't do that before with our other tax credits. So we're modeling this tax credit, this inclusionary credit, not only to provide us with the affordable, one of the many tools that will help us with affordable housing, not the only one, but also as a way to understand how we might want to do tax credits in the future, and that has been very important. So I wanted to go over those. It's very high level. We did get input from the development community, which I did integrate. There are some fundamental differences. They would like a waiver. We're not doing waivers. But we do have, I think, a bill that would give us way more than what we had before. It would give an opportunity for families to live in mixed income communities. And it would show to the state of Maryland and to the US that Baltimore is committed, is strategic, it is intentional about making sure that there are mixed income communities and affordable housing for everybody. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ramos. With that, we're going to jump into questions or concerns. First, before I turn it over to agencies, are there any questions or concerns from members of the council? At this point, we're going to turn it over to Office of Equity and Civil Rights. I believe they were the last to provide, their support or opposition on it. So on behalf of OECR, we have Talal to present to us.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Office of Equity and Civil Rights has conducted a racial equity impact assessment of City Council Bill 22-0195 and has concluded that the bill as written will have an inconclusive impact on access to affordable housing options for low-income, Black, Indigenous, Latino, and other Baltimore City residents of color. Over the course of our assessment, we found that there are many factors that needed to be taken into consideration, such as how developers may adjust their business practices as a result of this policy, whether the city will be able to sustain the fiscal component of the program, and a slew of other factors. Therefore, it was difficult to assess just how much of an impact, either negative or positive, this bill will have on access to inclusive and affordable housing in Baltimore City.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to turn it over to agencies. All the other agencies that are represented here today had the ability of providing their opinion associated with the bill. At this time, I don't know, Bob or anyone else from the administration, if you would like to kind of bring up any concerns or support or questions that you might have to the council.
Sure, I can start on the financial concerns. Can folks hear me? So just wanted to start with one, I think, major concern that we have with this bill is, and what the councilwoman had talked about, is this study provision. You know, our view is that the study provision, the pause and study after 400 units or 5 years, is not nearly strong enough for what is needed in this bill. And let me explain to you why I think that is.
Just real quick, we didn't go over the amendments, but we brought it down from 5 years to 3 years, and I believe we still have 400 in there. Yeah, so 3 years at 400 units.
We saw that. Yep.
Okay,
yep.
cool.
Did see that version. I still don't think that's strong enough, and I want to explain why. So, you know, a study period to look at something for a minor policy or something that doesn't have a big fiscal impact, I can understand that. This is a major policy change and a major fiscal impact. At the current pace of development, this program would add about $800,000 of cost to the city budget each year. And not only, it wouldn't add $800,000 and then level off over time, it would add $800,000 and then another $800,000 in year 2 and then another $800,000 in year 3, all the way until you get to year 30. So this is not a new program that gets put into place and then kind of flatlines over time. because it's a 30-year affordability period, every time a new development goes forward, we're subsidizing the difference in the rent for those programs. We're going to have to do that for 30 years. And then the next year, we're going to do new development. We're going to have to cover that for 30 years. In year 3, we're going to have to new development, cover that for 30 years. So this is not a new program that starts at $1 million and just flatlines. This grows and grows and grows. You know, I don't have to bore you with where we are financially. I think right now we're in a much more precarious financial position than we've been in years since I've been here. You know, I've talked to the council a little bit that we got hit with this additional cost for schools last year, which really hurt us in the fiscal 24 budget. We did not correct that issue completely in the 24 budget because we had to use one-time sources to balance the budget for the first time in my career that I've been here that we had to do that. We got some temporary funding from the state, $10 million, and we had to use $30 million of fund balance, which is one-time resources, just to balance for 24. So that issue is not fixed. And I know it kind of seems like it goes away, like we get done the budget and everybody goes on their business, but we still have a structurally unbalanced budget at this point. You know, what I would say is that what we have proposed and been advocating for since very early on in this legislation is not to have a study period, but just to have a sunset. I mean, any other major piece of legislation with this kind of impact has a sunset, a hard sunset where you stop at a certain point and then it takes action to reauthorize that program. And, you know, a sunset doesn't mean that the program ends forever. A sunset just means that when we get to a certain point, we pause, and the units that have been built through this policy would stay because they have a 30-year affordability. So if we were to build, say, 100 units based on this policy and it sunsets, those 100 units would stay affordable for 30 years. We don't lose them when the bill sunsets. But a sunset just at least has a hard checkpoint for us to stop and say, can we afford this? How fast are the costs growing? And where are we financially 3 years or 5 years in the future when we have that sunset? So what we have proposed is a sunset that would either be the sooner of when we reach 100 affordable units produced through this policy, or 5 years, whichever is sooner. It's hard to say what would come sooner because, you know, development takes a long time to get off the ground. I know there's a period of 180 days even after this is passed of when it would start, so it's hard to say when that would be. But I think having a sunset of either 5 years or 100 units would at least give us a hard checkpoint to say, how's this going? What is the cost and what is the future cost of this, and can we still afford that? To me, that would be still significant progress versus the prior policy, which we've said over a course of, 15 years only produced about 30-something units. So, you know, that's our position, is that just a pause and study provision in this bill, while I appreciate the progress on that, I just don't think it's nearly strong enough for a major policy change that we're putting here, and something that's going to have a major impact on the city budget in the years ahead of us.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. I guess just a couple quick questions. When you go over the calculation for us, about $800,000 per year, and it compounds year after year, in that equation, we don't really talk about the revenue that will be generated from the units, particularly after the 5-year 80% high performance tax credit kind of burns off, and then we go down to 30 and so on. I guess through your analysis, have you ever combined the two and developed projections based off that?
Yeah, so the way we look at this is that this inclusionary tax credit for here is all cost. There's no revenue that comes with it. There is a tax credit to spur market rate multifamily housing developments, and that tax credit is 80% of the taxes in the first 5 years, and then it declines to 30%. So the way I think of this is, this is not like your typical tax credit. This is purely cost, where we're reimbursing owners, property owners, for the difference between the market rate and that lower rent that we're requiring in this bill. There's already a tax credit that's needed, you know, we believe, to get the properties built in the first place. That comes with some net revenue. Yes, there's a credit in the first year, in the first 10 years, and so the revenue is not as much as we would like because we have to provide a subsidy to get that development. But that piece of it, the project itself comes with revenue, but that's already in place. This bill itself is just basically saying, for those new projects that get built, the city is going to bear a cost to subsidize the property owner for the difference between the market rate and the lower rate. And again, I understand why from a policy standpoint, that's a positive thing and why we would want to do that. But we just have to be aware that that is a significant new cost in the city budget. And because of the long 30-year affordability period, the cost grows and grows and grows and grows over a long period of time. So given those dynamics, I mean, my feeling is just a sunset is just the prudent thing to do to make sure that when we get to a certain point, we just say, okay, and we might want to reauthorize it. I mean, if things look better at that point and the policy is working, maybe we come back and we say, yeah, we can raise the limit from 100 units and we can get to 200 now over the next 5 years. But to just pause and study, my realistic assessment of thinking of that from having worked here for a while is that there's a lot of things we say we're going to study a couple years from now, and it's just kind of like you look at it and it goes away. I think a hard checkpoint is needed for something of this magnitude.
Sticking with that point, when you said subsidize the unit with this like new tax credit, is it really subsidizing the developer, builder, owner, or is it really subsidizing the Baltimore resident who taxpayers are going to pay for these developments? And I don't want to play semantics, but I want to like really hit that. I think like the high performance tax credit, does provide the pathway for the developer to actually pencil out the deal, get the development done. But I look at this as a way of subsidizing renters who should have a right to live in every community of Baltimore, and that's kind of like the core, the foundation of inclusionary housing. So when we say subsidize the unit with this new tax credit, could you kind of go over that or?
Sure. So I think on the base tax credit, the high performance tax credit, yes, in our judgment, you need some kind of subsidy to make the project work, to make a pencil out, to make sure those projects get built in the first place. Now, we could argue about, is 80% in the first 5 years the right amount? Is it 90? Is it 70? I mean, I think there's a lot of disagreement among a lot of parties on this, including a lot of people in this room.
And by the way, this process that we've been undertaking for several months didn't include the full evaluation of the high performance tax credit. This was specifically to inclusionary housing. So
right.
That's not to say that folks that are in support of the inclusionary bill are also in support of keeping high performance the way that it is. Just think it's important to note that.
Right. And to the second point on the, on the cost of this credit, yes, you are, call it a subsidy or call it support for the renter, somebody to get in those buildings. That's true. And like I said, from a policy standpoint, that's not a bad thing. I mean, inclusionary housing, I think we all agree, is a positive thing for the city. The point I'm trying to make is that just be aware that that comes with a significant cost, and it grows, grows rapidly over a long period of time, all the way through 30 years.
Understood. I just wanted to clear up the point that we're not subsidizing the unit for the development further. We're just more or less subsidizing the actual renter. The last thing I have, Bob, for you is you said 100 units is the administration's recommendation for a cap. Now, in all your modeling and analysis, how many units did you see was growing year over year? I remember a number of 90. Is that right?
Yeah, it's about 80. So what we looked at in our modeling, which a lot of you have seen, is that our current pace of development, and again, this is going by projects that received the high performance market rate tax credit, not the inclusionary piece, but the high performance market rate, just to build a multifamily project. We're, on average, we're seeing about 6 of those coming online per year. That's within the last 5 years. We looked at the numbers. I mean, all of those projects are different sizes, but if you look at it on average, we've got about 800 units or so coming online total in those buildings, and if you take 10% of that, that's about 80 units per year. That if you continue the pace of that and we had this bill, you would be generating about 80 per year. Now, again, all of my projections that I've shared assumes that pace stays the same. It's really hard to say if that will continue. I mean, interest rates are higher now, right? So it's a little bit harder to do, kind of make some of those projects work. But we just kind of assumed, like, if 6 projects come online with the same number of units that we've seen over the past 5 years, that you get about 80 units a year. And that was how we calculated the cost, and that's why we came up with, once we hit that point where we get to 100, that would be over $1 million of cost, and so we'd want to be looking and saying, well, wait a second, how quickly is this happening? What's the result we're getting, and can we afford to go further? I'm even in a sunset provision, like I said, I don't think that means that the program just ends forever. It just is, again, it's a checkpoint for us to say, should we reauthorize this? Can we get to 200 now? Can we get to 300? Can we get to 150? Or do we just say, we got to pause, something's not right with this, we may need to make some corrections, and then you can always come back later and reauthorize more units as the city looks at to see what it can afford.
So if your projections remain accurate, if the course of what we've seen over the past couple of years, based off your projections, if that continues proportionally, I guess the administration's position and what you're asking the council to do would be to just sunset it after 1 year, a little over a year.
It would be somewhere between, well, let's talk about what years mean, because in my modeling, what I call year one is that first year that you actually have the cost, right? But the way this bill is laid out, you would have this 180-day time period to kind of write the rules and regulations, get it kicked off, and then you'd have projects that have like a long lead time that are being built and applying for the tax credit to come online to actually get built and then actually have the units in service, so to speak. So what I call year one in my modeling that I've shared with folks on the council, in reality, that's probably going to be 2, 3, maybe longer years until we hit that number, which is why what we were proposing was, should we just have a sunset that's 100 units or 5 years, whichever comes earlier. And again, it's just a checkpoint to say, how's this working? What have we done? I mean, 100 units would mean, potentially, like I said, in our current environment, 6 or more, big buildings being built with inclusionary units that are subsidized now, for the renter to be in service. So I think that would make sense as a good point to stop and pause and look at this. And again, that would be 3 times the number of units that we produced in the last 15 years, and we could be doing that in 3 or 4 years with this bill. So that just seems reasonable to me to kind of pause at that point.
Yeah,
That's
I'm going
all.
to turn it over to Odette. Thank you so much, Bob. I think the problem with that is, we're basically taking something that was shameful, 17 years, 34, 37 units, not sure where we go, and then maybe like patting ourselves on the back because we're able to kind of multiply it by 2 or 3. So I think that's where the core of this issue is. So we want to kind of do away with the 30 number, and we should be proud of, a couple hundred or as much as possible over the course, but, I just have some concerns here. Councilwoman, you have questions?
Yeah, 2 questions. In all of our negotiations, both public hearing and the many hours of meetings, so I do appreciate everybody's many hours that they're spending on this. Bob, the language that you'd been using is pause. This is the first time I've heard you say sunset. So I'm wondering about that because there's different ways to do it. There's the way that we have the language now, which is to have a study. There's the same language from the previous bill, which was basically a reauthorization. There's a sunset like we have in some other tax credits and some other bills that just says it ends. And, it's a drafting issue, but I'm concerned that the change in language may seem like that that at some point in time we want to end this, and I just wanted to clarify that with you.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I don't think with a sunset, our intent would be to end it permanently. It's forcing us to intentionally choose to expand it. Again, knowing at that point that the fiscal situation changes, the market environment changes, and just gives us a chance to evaluate. I think the fear that I have with the current version of the bill is, yes, there's kind of this study, but while you're doing the study, the program is continuing potentially to grow. You have more projects that are qualifying. And remember, every new project that qualifies,
Understood.
you got 30 years to
Right.
pay for that. So to me, that's why what I would call a sunset would be a hard sunset where the requirements would pause. But again, it doesn't mean the program goes away forever. The council would have the authority to obviously reauthorize it. It would give us a chance to just stop while we would do that analysis and make sure that it doesn't grow, the cost doesn't grow out of control. So when I was saying pause earlier, I mean like a true pause, which is a sunset. And we have sunsets on a lot of bills. Like all of our tax credits have sunsets, and all of those get reauthorized, right? So it's not unreasonable to think that we would sunset the bill, and there's a date that's very clear in the legislation, if we had that we would be working even before that sunset date or before that time to be evaluating, month by month and year by year where we stand at any given
Understood.
point, so.
And then the second question was, I have a chart that you did for us that talks about $2 million. So you looked at cap scenarios of 2 million, 1 million, and 2 million. And so by, that third year, with assuming that we would spend $2 million, it produces about 200 units, a little less than that. I'm curious why, and we've been thinking about if we were going to do a cap of some sort to think a little bigger than 100 units. And so I'm just kind of curious as to the 100-unit language that we're hearing today. I've heard it a couple of times, but mostly we've been trying to think a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah, to be honest, when you're facing which we are, starting fiscal 25 planning, we're facing $100+ million structural deficit. Even doing another million seems kind of crazy, right, to the budget people, right? So if we were in a balanced position or closer to balance, I could see saying, yeah, we have some room to kind of run with, and maybe we can get to 200 or 300. But when you happen to be in the position we are, which is it's going to be a really rough budget year, and again, we're structurally unbalanced now because of what happened last year with the additional costs we're picking up. I'm being, I think rightly so, very conservative in saying, let's just get to 100 units or what is the equivalent of around $1 million of cost and stop there, just based on what we know about the fiscal environment now. But of course, that's open to, conversation and discussion. But I think, again, when you're facing the precarious, outlook that we have, even to me, even 100 is being pretty aggressive, frankly, when you don't have the money to do even what you're doing today. So that's where that number came from.
Thank you. Councilman Cohen?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the folks from the administration and to all the folks that are here. This is a question for the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. I was wondering if you could expound a little bit on your report. I would assume, given that sort of the goal is economic integration, or at least inclusionary integration, that OECR would be supportive. I don't see this as a panacea for decades and centuries of segregation in our city, but it seems like an earnest attempt to move the needle toward more inclusive, integrated housing. And so I'm curious why the ambivalence for the Office of Civil Rights to support this.
So we support the intent of the legislation, but there are several factors that you have to look at. So if it does go into effect and the city cannot afford to sustain the program, you put the residents who may be in those units in a precarious situation. What do? Do they stay there? Do they have to leave? What does that look like, right? And so we didn't have enough information to say what it would look like, so it's hard to conclude. And we don't want to be in a position to be supporting any possible harm that may come about as a result of a policy decision that is intended to do good. But again, there are several factors that have to be taken into consideration when determining the equity impacts. So either positive or negative. The developers could completely change their business models and say, well, we're not going to develop any apartment buildings. So and then we wouldn't have any units. So we have to take all of that into consideration. And our report is not to say that we shouldn't do it. It's just to say that on our end, it's hard to really get into and be definite about what the impact would be, whether or not it will actually improve affordable access to housing. That depends on if the units are there. And if the units aren't there, then we maintain the status quo.
Yeah, no, and I can appreciate that. I think just to parse it, what I understand as sort of the intent within, and actually what this legislation is that it would not put the burden on the development community so much as it's really placing the burden on the city for supporting these units. And then in terms of, I didn't fully understand the concern about harm if the units were created, but then the tax credit was removed, then those tenants would be removed. Can you expound on that? I'm not clear on what that scenario would look like.
So, I mean, it goes back to what the finance report says, right? If the city is saying that there is likely going to be this deficit of about $100 million, and it doesn't look like it is a sustainable program, then what happens, right? If you do have people in those units and the city decides, well, we'll stop after 100 units, you know, you're not creating any additional units, so the other people who would have benefited will be harmed. But then those who are there, if they move on after 30 years, after the credit removed, they get another job and maybe they can afford to move out and maybe somebody else goes in, but you're operating on those same 100 units, if that makes sense. So what we had to look at was, when you look at racial equity impact, you look at whether or not the policy will either improve whatever the situation is. So if there's presently a situation that is precarious, where there is a lack of affordable and inclusionary housing in Baltimore City, and this is a step in the right direction, but if it's not sustainable, then in the long term, it will likely do more harm than good.
No, and I appreciate that. To me, I can't figure out the not sustainable part within this legislation, but do appreciate the report, and again, I think the thoughtful conversation and negotiation that's gone into this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman, you have additional?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up, if I may. The OECR also had suggested some really good suggestions that we did implement and put into the bill, like adding another renter. That OECR would be, on the board to kind of see, making sure that this occurs. It's disappointing to note that the report doesn't talk about how important it is that we're being intentional about making sure that we're having mixed income communities in a way that we haven't before. So I think that's just the point I think that I'd like to just emphasize. Thanks.
Was that a question? Was it a
It wasn't a question.
Oh, okay.
I just didn't know if you.
Oh, no.
I guess at this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from members that are still here? I guess next, from an agency perspective, I know we heard from Finance, OECR. Deputy Mayor, you would like to?
If I may, and I have some handouts, if I may. So, good evening, Council President, members of the committee. For the record, Justin Williams, Deputy Mayor for Community and Economic Development. I guess as the bottom line up front, the administration supports the intent of the legislation. We also recognize the financial realities that Mr. Sendemi mentioned. I think the bottom line request for you all is that to get more time to work the cost out. And I'll draw your attention to the back page, which talks about the cost. And I think we have some solutions just off the top of my head. For example, as a citywide bill, now we can look at density bonuses and ways to help out that wouldn't be a drain on the city's coffers. Initially, when the legislation was proposed last year, and 20 versions of the legislation ago, we had just focused on the typology A areas downtown where there's already unlimited density. But if we do a citywide bill, we could, for example, add density bonuses and parking reductions to make it easier to develop and reduce the cost to developers in other areas of the city. So that's like one example of many that we could sit down and talk about if we had more time. The cost, for example, so to draw attention further on the cost and kind of drill down a little bit, and this gets to the equity analysis part. I use some examples from the Somerset One project, which just had its groundbreaking last year. We used $1.5 million in city funds to create affordable units. That one created a total of 23 units for 60% AMI, 50 at 50% AMI, and 11 30% AMI. So the cost of the city for those units was $30,000 per unit for affordable unit. You'll see if you scroll down, or like the next paragraph, using the cap that was initially in the bill. I guess this version doesn't have the cap, but I used the cap number. So what was proposed was a $1,400 cap of the tax credit subsidy. If you do that 30 years, the net present value is $198,000. So the question and thing to consider is, as a city, do we want to spend $198,000 to create one unit, or use it to leverage it with other projects to create more units? So for example, the NHP project, which will be breaking ground next month in Park Heights, is 100 units. That's the second line on this chart. There'll be 100 units of senior housing that'll be affordable at $90,000 per unit. And so as a city, the consideration I think we should think about as a council and as a city and policymakers is we have a limited amount of money to spend on affordable housing initiatives. So we should be, and the fear I would have too is that we commit so much to inclusionary and that we will crowd out the spending on other things. And so that's the big picture. And I have other issues I can go through that are more, not deal breakers, but things that I think if we had time, we could go through and actually help make the bill better. Because we do have an intent. We are focused on making this bill better, making it work for the city. So I can go through those now, or we can talk about the cost.
Well, I guess just to be clear, I guess what is the administration's kind of view on what inclusionary housing looks like? Because the examples that we're kind of talking about don't necessarily fit into the examples of what inclusionary housing looks like. These are, I know one is a low-income tax credit deal. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry?
One is a low-income tax credit deal,
Right.
A LIHTC deal.
Right.
So the point of inclusionary housing is to provide folks the opportunity to live in spaces and buildings in areas that they would not necessarily be able to afford, even though their tax dollars are paying for it. So when we talk about inclusionary housing, I guess from the administration's perspective, what is your view on inclusionary housing? Because the examples that you laid out to us, how we do this comparison, is comparing an apple to an orange because it's not inclusionary housing.
Right. So, I mean, the argument has been made that it's about affordable housing, and I agree, and the administration agrees. Inclusionary zoning, inclusionary housing is an important tool in the toolkit for developing integrated communities. So it's great for the community, and the building, people win the lottery ticket and get in a new building, that's great for them. The concern would be, what about the rest of the people who don't get the benefit of the lottery ticket to get an affordable housing unit? Are they in a community that is less developed than it could be because more money is going to this project? I think there's a balancing test, and that's the big picture question is we need to balance how we're spending on housing citywide. And so that's the big picture issue of the crowding out investment.
So what is the administration's view of concentrating low-income units in black communities? You know, particularly Park Heights, you know, there's been a tremendous amount of core work. There's been a tremendous amount of effort that was put in to try to come up with the master plan to ensure that we develop mixed income neighborhoods, particularly in historic black communities like Park Heights. But many of the groundbreaking and ribbon cuttings that we go to are just filled with low-income tax credit, like the ones you're suggesting. I guess the concern is, you know, are we reinventing the wheel where now we're just concentrating poverty or concentrating low-income units in certain sections of our city while putting taxpayer dollars into other parts of our city that are coming up with new buildings that most of Baltimoreans can't afford? That's kind of the crux of why we're here from an inclusionary housing perspective.
Sure. I mean, I think there obviously, the Park Heights project is decades long, and century of disinvestment is going to take a long time to dig out of that hole. And obviously the projects that have gone forward more quickly have been the ones that we've been able to subsidize and go forward. My view, and one thing that I think we should propose and think about is, can we use our inclusionary housing dollars to subsidize and spur mixed income development outside of the downtown footprint? It's important to provide opportunity for communities and people renting in buildings to live in downtown, but I think what I heard when the first committee of the whole met was we want to see housing projects in our neighborhoods. And so one way to do that could be to be thinking thoughtfully about, could we do a project-based voucher for a part of the development? So like the first one, the Somerset 1 project, has market rate and affordable housing units in the project, and because the density that was able to be developed there, there's now going to be a grocery store in that area, which is kind of the community development framework, which we're all, I think we're all want to see happen.
But the problem is, again, just getting back to why we're here, inclusionary housing. So in the summer, so the senior housing in Park Heights, definitely, I had major concerns about that project on the Board of Estimates. I'll continue to talk about that particular project. Surprised the administration tried to highlight it here at the inclusionary housing because of all the level of concentration of low-income housing that we're continue to pour in black communities like Park Heights. But with the Somerset deal, 20 out of the 94 units, 20 out of the 114 units are market rates. So again, that's not really inclusionary housing, particularly in an area that we have concern. I guess it's just kind of getting at the crux of why we're here from an inclusionary housing perspective and hearing where you are. I think this council has been from day one supportive of and only would move forward with the citywide bill. We're definitely interested in seeing, development, particularly economic development in our communities that have been hit hardest by failed policies of the past. But what we also want to do is, with the money that has been subsidizing downtown and around the water, all Baltimoreans having access to those living conditions. Now, obviously, that's going to cost more than what the city is putting into a 4% or 8% tax credit deal from a low-income tax credit perspective. But again, I think we're comparing apples to oranges.
I mean, I recognize they're definitely a different type of product. I guess the big level concern is that the city has a finite amount of money it's spending on housing. If it's going disproportionately to inclusionary, that means there's going to be at the expense of other kind of development projects and communities. We're obviously working with Build and GBC on vacant housing reduction work. And so, for example, if you took the 200, and this number of 198K present value, that's based on the unit cap. If there's no unit cap, it's probably $300,000 in net present value, which could be used towards appraisal gap filling for row home development of vacant properties and the impact investment areas we're working on. So, I mean, we support the goal, we want to work with you, and that's why I say, for example, if it's citywide, we can look at bonus units and bonus density as a way that won't drain the city's coffers, but will help spur development outside of downtown. It won't be the same fiscal impact.
Councilwoman Ramos?
Many meetings ago, Commissioner Kennedy said directly that density bonuses don't work. So we completely took it off the table. We also had heard from the real estate industry, by the way, that the parking restriction piece, reducing parking restriction, wouldn't work because it is an upfront cost that would help pay for the unit, but not the long term. I am offended that this memo accuses us of not listening to the real estate industry, which is not correct. You were not in any of the negotiating meetings, none, zero, okay? So having this memo come from the mayor's office from you, I'm just appalled because it looks exactly like the memo we got from the development industry, which, by the way, I did work with them and did respond and included a lot of the things that they had asked for. But the fact is that this doesn't have, you weren't in any of the meetings to know whether or not they were even present. You weren't in any of the meetings to know whether or not we were talking about density bonuses or not. We took that off the table immediately because of the advice that we got from the development community. Okay? So that's where we are, and the Department of Housing and Community Development. So that's why we ended up with this model. It's not ideal. As a matter of fact, many of my colleagues would rather have, a parking reduction or a density bonus. But it was told to us, because we actually listened to a lot of people, that that wasn't going to work. So we ended up with a tax credit. And we ended up doing this in a way that I think still is going to be able to provide units. We can talk about a sunset, we can talk about a reauthorization, we can talk about all of that. But the fact is that, we have been listening. And yes, there were many gaps in this year because there were so many things happening this year that did not allow us to be able to do many months where we weren't negotiating. But when we were negotiating with everybody. And so I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that I don't actually understand where this is even coming from because it never entered any of our negotiations that we had with the mayor's office, other than the idea of the cap, and also we did take away the other piece here that the developers wanted, which is the 14,400. So thank you, Mr. President.
If I may respond.
Oh, sure, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I apologize, I'm not trying to lend defense. As I understand how the negotiations went in the beginning, the density bonus wouldn't work because the initial version of the legislation based on the enterprise report called for only the inclusionary housing policy in the typology A areas, the downtown core area, which doesn't have a density limit, doesn't have a parking requirement. I mean, I think we're all aligned with the cap. I'm suggesting that's another possibility to help make us meet in the middle, to say there's going to be a cap on the fiscal impact. This is an example where, hey, come together. Now that we're going to go citywide, we can take some time to figure out how to reduce the fiscal impact and have some more flexibility and be able to move forward to help everybody, achieve their goals here. The other issue with the real estate industry feedback was, I know you've been working with BDW. I'm just suggesting that we didn't necessarily have the input from real estate finance, so like industry lenders, to make sure that they're on board and that there's no impact. Maybe there's not, but this is one of those things, like, to bring them on the table too specifically, to say, hey, is there going to be an impact here that we're not thinking about? To bring them to the table, like the version of the legislation, if it's not online, can they review and have an impact? Another question, like, are hotels, extended stay suites, are they going to be impacted by this legislation? That's an ambiguity that could be caught with some time to think through and have the,
No,
catch
and
things.
I appreciate that. I will tell you that I did send the drafts over to the bankers industry because, that was important and they asked for it. And also that I had received some consultation from a couple of finance. So I did do my due diligence. Thank you.
And just about the density bonus, because that was a lot of punning very early on. The council's always been in the position that we wanted this to be citywide. So the administration has always known that when the density discussion was on the table. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
If I may, and I was here when the initial hearing happened, and we were still working with the enterprise report. I know the council had its desire, but I think that's where the disconnect may have happened, was that
you guys were so focused on the enterprise report. Understood.
we procured the report from Enterprise, which is a reputable nonprofit affordable housing developer.
Thank you. Madam VP?
I guess I just want to kind of piggyback on what Councilwoman Ramos had just mentioned. And thank you, Councilwoman Ramos, first of all, for introducing this bill and taking years, really, to work with the administration and really try to put together a package, because it's I just keep seeing this figure, 34 houses and units in 17 years. It's embarrassing, I want to say, for the city. I know firsthand surrounding cities like Newark, New Jersey, very progressive in their inclusionary housing and the things that they're doing. For me, inclusionary housing promotes dialogue between the developer, and we need that dialogue in communities. And thank goodness Park Heights has a Park Heights Renaissance that can do that dialogue with development. Thank goodness for Southwest Partnership and some other areas of our city that have groups of people that developers have to go through a step to talk with the community, to talk with. These things were not in place before, and these are some of the reasons why our communities have been, our black and brown communities have been neglected, and that's why we are promoting it citywide. I personally have been involved in inclusionary housing way back when the group Acorn existed. And they had, before I became a council person, and they had meetings at ASME headquarters, and I look around in this room and see some of those people that were still part of those meetings. And to sit here today and see that only 34 units in 17 years, I just can't wrap my arms around it. But I also want to say, I'm not understanding, thank you, Finance Department, Budget, for doing what you're doing, but, we're in an era now that it's time for us to work out some challenges. It's time to take risks. Housing is what is the first step that's going to help all of the other things that's going on in the city. And we need to, and it's also about equity and equality. If we don't take risks, and that's what our jobs are as council people. So this is like one of the most important bills that we can do as a council to move everything forward. And if the administration can't understand and see that, we got to sit back down at the table, because this is why we are all sitting in this room. Dialogue has been happening, and 17 years, like I said, is an embarrassment. I go to national meetings and hear other cities talk about their wonderful inclusionary housing programs and how developers are talking and communicating, and they understand what they have to do when they build a project. And we have something big that's getting ready to happen downtown as well at the Inner Harbor. It's time to wake up, and it's time to start working together, and this is the way this is the inroad to start this. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Chairwoman McCray.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a very simple question. It's something that I'm hearing often tonight, and I'm assuming I may hear it from a decent amount of agencies as well as some groups that are advocating for certain things within this bill. What is the timeline? You stated that you need additional time to work on this bill. We all know that it's an urgent bill. I know why I may need additional time in relation to amendments, but how much time is the additional time that you guys are stating that you need?
Councilwoman Nina Themles with the Mayor's Office of Government Relations. I think given that in the past 72 hours we've seen 3 additional sets of amendments, I would like to at least be able to have a full 24 hours from the receipt of the last set of amendments. There were 2 significant changes that were received at around 4 p.m. this afternoon that require additional research and evaluation by our finance department. And so at the very least, we would like to be provided with a reasonable amount of time, which I would say at the bare minimum would be 24 hours, if not several days, to ensure that we know and can segment out the 22 previous versions of amendments and where we stand today, and make sure that we don't see any more amendments coming kind of based in an email on the fly in the hour before the hearing.
And Councilwoman Marvin James, Mayor Scott's Chief of Staff, I want to start with my response by saying that we have every strong desire from the administration to be a humongous supporter of inclusionary housing. There is no doubt, particularly this mayor, his record and where he has stood from his time on the council, as council president, and as mayor, to be a strong supporter of inclusionary housing. What the administration is simply asking is that as we are working through this legislative body, that we have time to make sure that we are providing the council the correct information via budget, via finance, to make sure that we are able to provide not only the council, but to be able to provide our residents, our constituents, business owners, advocates, the correct information. Any insinuation that the mayor and or this administration is not supportive of inclusionary housing and it being done at a bold level is inappropriate. That is where the mayor stands, and more importantly, that is the correct stance of what this administration is trying to do.
All right, Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. President. My comments were similar to Councilwoman McCray as well as Vice President Middleton. This is an issue that we must solve. I just want to know, just very clear so that the public hears it, everyone in the room is hearing it. I think we need a drop dead date on like when we get to the date and say we're finalizing amendments this day, negotiations end by this day. We have a bill that everyone can agree that is appropriate financially, not only, but philosophically, because I hear the differences. I think we're all saying the same thing, but I think that we need a drop dead date in terms of like when we can vote, when the amendments, because we got 41 pages this morning, then changes were made, right? But for me as a person who was subject to inclusionary housing, who lived in a building where people had inclusionary housing, this needs to be done. I think about seniors in West Baltimore who need access to housing. I'm even thinking about how I close the appraisal and assessment gap in West Baltimore with other funds because we don't have access, right? So this is this is one of those things where like this is one of the tools, but I think we need to finalize this tool. But honestly, we need to start thinking about other ways, right? Such as rent control, looking at ways that we can monitor and change things where it meets everyone. Because while this bill addresses a certain subset, I think about low income, fixed income seniors who won't have this access, even with inclusionary housing, right? So we got to get this done, move to the next one, and start thinking about how we meet everyone at their different AMI so that they get access to housing before we get into a crisis that is gone completely out of control. So I just want to add those comments. I hear everyone and where we need, but I think that we need to have a drop dead date.
Thank you, Councilman Torrance. Are there any additional questions or concerns from members? DHCD, is Commissioner Kennedy or anybody on from DHCD? You guys okay? We just want to make sure.
Oh, you don't need to worry about it.
So we're good?
We're good.
Yeah. So to responsibility, you're okay?
Mr. President, if I may, I very much appreciate the number of hours that everybody's been spending on this, and it literally has been hours. We've been at this for a really, really long time, and I'm really grateful that one of the big things that we're all on the same page about is that we need to do this, and so that is great. And that, honestly, I think that we have had, and colleagues, I'm able to show you all of the analysis. I've got spreadsheets here. I've sent some spreadsheets to you all as you've asked for analysis. We understand where the costs are going to be because of Bob's analysis. It is the finance department's job to say that we are going to be without resources and try to make sure that everybody's aware of those issues, and they do their job very well. And so I think it's just important that we have been negotiating. We are so close. We have been doing this. To insinuate that we just now decided in the last 72 hours to negotiate is false. It's false. And so I think that, and I just want to make sure that we know that, yes, we had 2 last-second amendments today. We had a whole slew of amendments on Friday. That's some of the things that we were trying to do now that we had a deadline of today to try to get this done. So I would appreciate my colleagues' support for moving forward today. And thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for City Council Bill 22-0195R. First, we're going to go over each amendment, and then we're going to vote on the amendments for 22-0195, and then vote on the entire bill. So,
Mr. President, the description that I had of the bills was as amended. In the council members' packets is basically one amendment that has the entire bill. because it was too confusing to have 14 different amendments, or 25 or 30. So we have the one amendment that is basically the entire bill, and this is for 22-0195. So that is the only amendment for that bill.
I think it's important, just for the process, if you could briefly go over the amendments that's embedded in it.
Sure thing.
That way everybody will be on
Sure.
the same page.
Amendment number 1 is the entire bill, but I'll go over, again, with this, I understand it's a big bill, so we'll go through everything. The capital letters is what is added, the brackets are what is removed. And so you'll see that we added a commissioner for the Commissioner of the Department of Housing and Community Development. We added department as a definition. We had a definition, I'm on page 3, of department, of dwelling unit, so that we were all clear about what that meant. The rest of what you're seeing here is remuneration as well. And then on page 4 at the top, we have tax credits and other public assistance. So those are the amendments there. We also added a letter L for significant land use authorization, because the bill not only applies to those who are getting public subsidy, but also if they get a variance or anything like that. On page 6, we go through all of the definitions of moderate, very low, and extremely low income. So as we know, what we have here is extremely low income is households below 30% of AMI. Moderate income is 80% of AMI, and low income is 60% of AMI. So those next couple of pages were those definitions of the various income levels that we are talking about. So that's on 6, 7, and 8. So we have the rest of this in terms of scope and applicability was removed. Rules and regulations, this is the section about making sure that DHCD does the rules and regulations, and what would be included in them, which would be defining and clarifying terms, determining the eligibility, setting the standards, et cetera, et cetera. The next piece is about the inclusionary board, which is on page 12. The board is comprised, the original bill had 15 members. We are doing 9 voting members and 1 ex officio. And you'll see in the caps that there is the housing commissioner or designee, the planning director or designee, Office of Equity and Civil Rights is a non-voting member. And then you'll go down to page 13 where we have the breakdown between the mayor's office. The mayor would nominate 4 members, and the council president would nominate 3 members, and it goes through our normal process to move forward. And then, so you'll see the breakdown here, a nonprofit developer, a lender, somebody experiencing housing, and a renter, for-profit multifamily, nonprofit, affordable housing developer, and another renter. We did work diligently with DHCD on the outline of the types of people that would be on the board. The rest of this is about, quorum, et cetera. that is in the amendments. We also have the duties of the board and the annual report that comes before the council and the Board of Estimates, which would be something that the board would work with DHCD on. And so you'll see on page 15 all of the various reporting that we need in terms of percentage of dwelling units that are created, an annual aggregate, the reports, annual reports from each development, because each development would have to do a report as well. Let's see, we also originally had that the inclusionary board would actually approve the inclusionary plans, but at the request of DHCD, that we are reviewing and providing comment. We do have that the board would be looking at the rules and the regulations. I'm on page 16, excuse me. And then the very heart and the meat of the bill is right here on page 17. And the original bill from 2007 had that inclusionary units would be included for residential properties that had 30 or more residential dwelling units. We brought that down to 20. And let me just be clear that this is just for rental, so we took all of the references to the ownership out of the bill. We utilize this language around receiving public subsidy or land use authorizations, as well as this newly constructed, wholly renovated, or converted language, which is directly from the high performance tax credit language, so that we're all understanding which types of units we are talking about. Page 18 has the, so also on page 17 is the fact that we have to do 10% units to 60% of AMI. Page 18 has 5% units if there's additional subsidy for low and very low income households, and we did work with HABC on that language. Page 18 at the bottom is if the, what I said earlier, which is, that this is a floor and not a ceiling. So if there is something that we have to negotiate, like a TIF or something like that, that we can go higher. We do have exclusions. Exclusions are dorms, fraternities, residential care facilities. I had asked for other lists of what should be excluded a few times and did not get those. So maybe those will come later. Let's see, the rest of this is removed in terms of investment thresholds and density bonuses and the waiver provisions. This is all through page 20, 21, 22, and 23, and 24. The waiver provisions are on page 25, which we are deleting. Page 26 is new language that talks about the inclusionary housing plan. When there is the development is about to pull permits, they also have to submit an inclusionary housing plan. The plan would be submitted, DHCD can provide the form. It has to include affirmatively fair marketing, and it's also the review and comment on the inclusionary plan from the board. So then we did initially in the original bill have provisions around the fair housing laws and put them all in here. We are taking them out because we know that we have to follow fair housing laws anyway, and there's a reference to those fair housing laws. Page 28 is the report that each of the projects would have to come up with at the end of the year. which includes the income level of the people who've been rented to, the number of affordable units, the square footage, and various other data that we need in terms of the types of subsidy that they already have, that we need to really understand how the program is doing. The page 30 is the standards for units. We kept a lot of this because it basically says that all of the units have to be the same. If they all have granite countertops, then the affordable units should also have granite countertops. And so the rest of this in terms of a variance or a simultaneous offering is gone. The right of first refusal is out of here, but it's in a different bill as well, a different part of the bill. Page 33, master leasing. This was something negotiated with the development community if they're getting additional subsidy, that the opportunity for the city or HABC or a housing provider to master lease the units, which would count in the affordability numbers. Page 34 is the continued affordability. And this is where we say that the affordability period is 30 years, keeping in mind that the affordability period for the low-income housing tax credits is 25 years. So this is comparable to that. And the state of Maryland also adds a 40-year rider, which was not necessarily applicable here. And that instead of what we had before, which was that the clock would restart after a sale of the building, we're not doing that. The 30 years is concurrent, and that there would be a right of first refusal after that. Page 35 is affordability variance. So as somebody's income is increasing, they do not lose their unit. So they would continue to stay in that unit as income grows. And then when it reaches market rate, they can stay there, but another unit has to be made available. So, did you have a question? Do you want to ask? Yeah.
Question at that particular point?
Oh, right now or after she finishes?
Or it can be after. It doesn't matter, sir.
It's up to you.
Yeah, the councilwoman. So where would that additional unit come from? So as the 30 years is up, where would the additional unit come from?
Yeah, so the 30 years is separate from the income increase. So let's say I go into 4140 Light Street and my income is rising, I don't lose the unit as I go above 60%. I might go to 80%, I might go to 100. And once my income reaches where I can afford that unit at market rate, another unit must be made available. And so that's what this says. And typically, we had a discussion about this because it was brought up earlier in terms of what if there's no unit available.
Exactly. Yep.
Right? And so typically they aren't fully rented, and so there should be one available. But right now, it just says that one would be made available.
And we just look at it as the next available, so
As the
that'll
next
be
available.
in like the rules and regulations,
Yeah, so
correct?
that
So
right.
I'm living, you go ahead.
Yeah, so that would be, so it wouldn't, if one is not available right away,
The next
then
available.
the next available.
Under that particular developer or project, or how are you
In
determining?
that project. It has to, all the units have to stay in that development.
So that would be my additional question. So if the project is finite, so at 30 years, and if another project is not coming after it, where is the additional unit coming from?
No, it's not.
No. The 30 years is different than what we were talking about as the income rises. So the 30-year affordability period, we had long discussions about this. The 30-year affordability period, you're totally right. What happens after 30 years is that there is notice given to the city saying, we're at the end of our affordability period. So the city or a provider could say to the developer, well, we'll take it on and keep the affordability, okay? That's what it says now. Our original bill actually had it so much more permanent affordability, which would be, it's 30 years, but the clock restarts every time that the building may sell to a new owner.
Okay.
So that was preferable to me, but was a compromise made because it was asked for by the administration. So, yeah, so that's where the
No,
difference.
sir, I don't
Yeah, but
understand.
her question, if I could try to answer it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you're right, it's a finite amount of units. So what the councilwoman was explaining, say for instance, there were 10 units in a building, right? All 10 units are occupied. The 10th unit, so 1 through 9, then that 10th unit has you in it, right? You've gone from 60% AMI to now 115% AMI. You've gotten this large bonus and promotion at work. So now you no longer qualify for the program, right? So in theory, based off of the percentage, this building is supposed to have 10% of its unit set aside for inclusionary housing. That building is completely occupied. All the units in that building is occupied. The spirit of the bill and what will come in the rules and regulations is the next available unit has to go to a qualifier that's 60% now, because you have been promoted, you don't get put out your unit, the city will stop paying for the subsidy for you. You'll have to now pay for the subsidy. But however, the next available unit would go to someone that qualifies. It's important to do it that way because the basis of all of this is pure equity. So a unit that a person that's at 60% AMI is living in on the same level of pay scale through the rent roll looks like the same unit that someone who's at market rate is paying for. The same appliances, the same countertop, the same floors, everything's the same.
So does that include income reduction as well? So like if a person loses their job and they have to increase in their AMI, does the next unit?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a great point. So say if someone's at market rate and they can't afford to pay to live in that building anymore, the idea is probably the building's going to be at its cap from an inclusionary housing perspective.
So what would happen to that person?
They would downsize. Like, I mean, there's no provision in here because in that case, you could have a building where you're only supposed to have 10 units. Say it's an economic downturn in our country. 30 folks can't afford to pay there anymore. The city's not going to necessarily come in and do this program for the next 30 years because that would be completely unpredictable from a city perspective.
Yeah, and the only reason why I asked that is because we are headed for a financial downturn, and so that's why I'm asking those.
That would be scary.
Yeah, and so that's why I'm asking those types of questions because it essentially will take on, from a city perspective, it would take on more financial responsibility on the city, and so that's why I'm asking those questions. So.
No, I never framed it. We never framed it that way. That say someone lost their job and now they are in 60% AMI. One, they can definitely come and apply and do the income verification. Any unit that is available, based the constraints of this legislation, they can have access to. But there is no automatic provision that if you're in a market rate building, you have a significant loss of income, you're now at 60% AMI, would you automatically be able to retain your unit? Yeah. I think you were still going through some of the amendments, right?
Yes. And I.
Oh, you have a question, Councilman Torrance.
So I just want to raise a concern on page 19, the exclusion of dormitories. That would pose a hardship for the 7th District as we're looking to add dormitories for Coppin State University. And a large portion of Coppin students would, and this is an issue with us, with affordability in terms of those students. They are, historically with our HBCUs, are the historically low-income black students. So I think we have to make a consideration for those students, and especially as both institutions' population has increased, given the new Supreme Court decision. So I think that we have to create some flexibility for that. I mean, I'm fine with excluding some Hopkins students, but in terms of the HBCUs, in terms of how they can attract and maintain students in the city of Baltimore, that is a concern for me. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Is, Councilman, your question about the exclusion of dormitories? That was brought to us from the development community and also the universities. I don't know that the way that the dormitories work, it's either that they are paid for through scholarship or certain folks are paying for it. What did come to us, which is not in here because there's no definition, is like student housing that you see, for instance, in Charles Village or in Coppin, where it's not a dorm because it's not run by the state, by the school. Yeah.
So I'm torn on that because I think about Towson University and College Park, who have entered into agreements that these institutions are looking at, where a developer has gone out, created their actual housing for them off campus, and that students who are low income may not be able to afford that housing, but there's an opportunity that we can pay with public subsidy for those
So
who are
that
our
is-
residents for it. So I just want to make sure, because I don't want to leave things that are off the table that can impact Black and brown students at these institutions.
So that is actually those that you just described, where somebody is building the housing for the university that might be like on or near campus, are still included.
Yeah, they're called master lease agreements, so they're not.
They are, but sometimes, so case in point, Millennium is an institution at Towson that is on Towson's actual property.
Yeah.
And the university is leasing it, but it technically is a dormitory as well. So I just want to make sure that I don't want to limit the options for those institutions for this type of fund.
I mean, we can look into the legal definition of dormitory and see what we're cleaning up. I guess the goal of putting dormitories in there was for the traditional dormitory. If there's other examples, I think the example that you kind of brought to us today, kind of look at like master lease agreements, not as quote unquote dormitories. So they're 100% occupied by students at that university, but it is a relationship as if it's an apartment building. But we'll look at the formal definition of dormitories and try to ensure that we carve it out the right way if there's an issue. Councilwoman Ramos, if you could continue.
Yeah, thank you. And just on that point, we did try to figure out how to define student housing, which is, I think, what the councilman is asking for. There's no definition in the zoning code for that right now. And we were encouraged to try to put in provisions that say, so right now, student housing is included in the bill. These were exclusions. So student housing would be included. But it's also not, the dormitories, it's not the same as a dormitory, what you're describing. So that's the difference. Right, dormitories are not included, are not included in that. Okay, so thanks for your questions. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to go back to where we were. 37, okay. So on 36, we took out all of the ownership items. On page 37, we took out the offset fund, which was in the old law used if a development didn't want to build the housing on their project, that they could donate to the offset fund in order to create that unit elsewhere. And so we took that out as an option. This is all part of the offset fund. Page 39 is the judicial review. Initially, if there was an issue with a decision that DHCD made, that there would be an appeal to the Board of Estimates, which just makes no sense. So we have an appeal to the zoning board, which is the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals, which is appropriate. There's also obviously the court situation as well, or option as well, just like in any other decision. We also, in the original bill, there were criminal penalties. We took those out. to make sure that we're not trying to arrest people for not complying, but that there are fees related in that, and that DHCD would issue those fines as well. And then the uncodified language is the piece about the study that would occur after 3 years or 400 affordable units. And that we would have a public hearing after the study to understand what kind of changes we need to make to this ordinance. So that is an outline of the amendments. Any other questions?
Are there any questions?
I have one, sir.
Councilwoman Porter?
Thank you. On page 35 of 41, you mentioned about the first right of refusal. It says 1 year to the expiration of affordability period, the owner shall notify the Department of Housing and Community Development of affordability units, at which time the city or a designated nonprofit. Who designates those nonprofits?
Yeah, that is a good question. DHCD and HABC work with various nonprofits who would do a master lease type of situation. And so when we say designated nonprofits, it would have to be designated by DHCD.
I kind of understand maybe some of your concern there, Councilwoman, so.
Sorry, sir?
I said I kind of understand your concern there of leaving open-ended and not explicitly spelling it out, so maybe that's something that we can work on together. Are there any additional questions or concerns? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the
I'm
amendments.
sorry, sir, I have one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. The same section, rent increases, about, it says the percentage increase in an annual rent may not exceed the percentage increase of the cost of living. Is that based on, what is that cost of living based on? Where we are in the economy right now, or kind of where? No worries. So it is I'm still on page 35 of 41, section C, rent increases. And then subsection 2. It says the percentage of increase in annual rent may not exceed the percentage increase in the cost of living based on the appropriated inflator index determined by the housing commissioner. How is that increase determined on, and is it 100%?
That's all deleted.
I'm sorry?
Everything in brackets is deleted from the bill.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize. It's confusing with all the brackets and the underlining, so, but that has been deleted from
Yeah,
the
that
bill.
section. Any additional questions? At this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the amendments.
Move the amendments.
It's been moved and probably seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Burnett seconded. All those opposed, please say nay. Let me see how many nays we have. We have 3. Yes, well, this is just on the amendment. You want to explain on the amendment? Sure.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
And this is for my constituents. This is a bill overall for the city. As a legislator, it is, and I personally feel it is our responsibility to make sure that we are fully vetting, that we are providing meaningful input, and that we are taking the time. And I truly appreciate the due diligence that you've done in working with everyone on these amendments. But for me, I need more time to review these amendments and make sure that we are able to provide meaningful input. I don't want to do a rapid fire of questions towards you. This is a very important bill. It is very urgent. And when it comes to these amendments that we are voting on, I want to make sure that we're doing, and that I'm doing for my constituents, the right thing. Thank you, Mr. President, for
No,
allowing me
thank
that
you,
time.
Madam Chair. You're always extremely very thoughtful, responsive, and on top of it, so we truly appreciate that. I think that we have 3 noes and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 8 in the yes column. You have all of the, for the amendment. Now I'll take a motion to approve the bill as amended.
So moved.
It's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye. We have to do roll call, right? So we'll do a roll call. Mr. Green?
Councilman Moses?
Yeah. Yes.
Councilwoman Middleton?
Yes.
Councilman Bullock?
Let me explain my vote. So I think I've shared with everyone before. I sat on, in the previous term, sat on the Inclusionary Housing Board. We only had several properties that wound up being part of this program. Mostly we were receiving waivers. I look at the amendments, I look at this bill, and we know that there are significant changes. I'm generally supportive of the bill. However, I do think it would be prudent to have a bit more time for folks to digest this, as was suggested, whether it be a day or several days. But again, my vote is yes. But again, I think there is some concern and some unreadiness as it relates to the timing. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. One, I want to take my hats off to Councilwoman Ramos for the work that she's put in on this bill. This is a very complicated bill. For the last year and a half, and I'll repeat that, for the last year and a half, and I'll repeat that, for the last year and a half, we've been working tirelessly on this issue and have made a number of recommended changes to get to where we are today. And this is an injustice that we are trying to correct. It's not an easy one. I want to thank Finance for their analysis, their input. I think I'll be honest with you, I don't know that this is a perfect bill. I don't know that we are going to have a perfect bill, because in a year and a half, we are still here. Ultimately, I think we have to make a decision. We will have to move at some point. And I hope that if there are reasonable changes that need to be made between now and second reader, we can do that. But I think we need to move forward. So my vote is yes.
Councilwoman McCray?
Thank you. I want to explain my vote.
You can.
I want to say that, this isn't a perfect bill. I'm just not going to lie to you. Given that we did receive the amendments at 10:42 this morning, right? This isn't how I want to legislate. I'm just being frank. I don't want to vote no on this bill. I'm not going to vote no on this bill, but I have serious amendments that need to be made to this bill before it gets to second reader. If we cannot agree on it, then I'm going to have to vote no. And I just want to make sure my constituents understand that, right? I firmly believe in this, but this isn't how we should legislate. With less than 24 hours notice of this amendment, right? And it was 41 pages. And I'm just going to lean in on the fact, I'm a member of this council and I have a learning disability, dyslexia, right? 41 pages to go through, vetting each section of the pages, right? I believe in due diligence. Every question I've asked has been answered, but there's still more questions I have, right? So I think that, and I firmly say this, if we get to second reader, we have to have a conversation about serious amendments, because I don't want to vote no on the bill, but I think that we need to be clear, because I have institutions that are impacted by this. I have residents that are impacted by this. There are severely low-income residents that need to be somewhere addressed, whether it be rent control or any other policy about in this city. But there are at least 7 pages of concerns I have from reading this bill today. I still have at least 8 more pages to get through where I've redlined and thought about what is things that can make improvements, what conversations, what does sunset look like? The question about what is a cap versus not a cap. Where's the funding sources, right? Some of the words mention federal funds, some use public funds. What pot of money are they coming from? Those are conversations that we have to firmly believe in and have, because if we send something to the administration that does not make sense, not only philosophically, operationally, or financially, it's dead on arrival for the people who most need it. Failure is not an option, and I think that as a council, and I'm going to propose this date, that we need to get people back into a room, figure out these last bit of amendments that make this bill better by December 7th, because that will be the third reader if we vote it out tonight. So I think that we really need to have that conversation. I want to encourage the sponsor. I want to encourage development. I want to encourage the advocates. Let's sit down, hash out those small, minutia things, because I don't want someone who was like me, who needed inclusionary housing, who lived next door to someone in inclusionary housing later when I can afford to pay market rate rent, to have less units, because 32 is not a success rate. So I vote yes, but I want to make sure that we get down to the nuts and bolts and really do some serious amendments, because I just want to be frank, Mr. President, we cannot have anything sent to us with less than 24 hours notice for us to vote on.
Yes, and to be fair to the sponsor of the bill, she's really tried to run a really open process. Many of the amendments that she's discussed tonight have been discussed at previous meetings. I also want the council, as well as folks in the general public, know I think the term 41 pages has been thrown out a lot. It's 41 pages because of a lot of the exclusion from the previous bills and from all the previous discussion for the past year and a half. So when you deal with a bill for a year and a half and you have amendment after amendment, work session after work session, meeting with developers, meeting with finance, meeting with the advocates of the particular issue, you have a lot that winds up in the way that a bill needs to be structured at the end of this process. So again, the things that are in bracket are things that are not in this bill. However, we have to keep the history of the bill at this process. Mr. Green.
Councilman Burnett.
Thank you. I'd like to explain my vote, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
So I just, I want to thank the sponsor and the president's office and the advocates in the room, because I've had sort of the opposite experience where I was sort of getting a little bit worn out from so many people wanting to meet to discuss the bill, to whether they were for or against, including the advocates who I had to at some point say, look, I'm with you. I don't need another meeting on this. And so I do think that it's important to put that out there, because I do not want the narrative to be that there had not been a number of hearings on this bill. There's not been a number of discussions on this bill. The sponsor has called me week after week as each email has gone out to get my feedback on it, to get my perspective on this bill or any revisions to it. And so I feel like this has been a pretty engaging process over a year and a half. And if there were additional concerns that needed to be raised, there's always going to be additional amendments. There's always going to be additional thoughts or second thoughts or third thoughts. I have them all the time as the person that joins the other 14 people here and actually having to vote on something and put our name behind it. And so I do believe that there's been due diligence. I do want to also say the importance of this. I mean, there was something that was said tonight that really stood out to me, and that was, you know, when we've had fiscal challenges before, in the term I've been in office, there's never been a discussion about any of the other tax credits, any of the other subsidies, any of the other funding for the police department or anywhere else, where, you know, the belt tightening always happens on the back of the folks who need it the most, whether those are the young people or the folks who can't afford to live in certain communities. in the city of Baltimore. And so for me, I think that the higher calling of just doing the right thing and figuring it out in the same way that when we have a belt tightening and we look at some of the high market tax credits and we don't seem to ever turn the page on those to see if we can figure that out. And so I think it's about doing the right thing tonight, and I'm voting yes, Mr. President.
He said yes. Well, you have to say it in the mic, Councilman, please.
It's a yes. Thank you.
Mr. Green.
Thank you. So I want to go back a little bit because at each juncture where we had the working sessions for inclusionary housing, the councilwoman, I brought this to your attention about having a clear economic plan for the city in relation to this particular legislation, and hearing that we have $100 million that we are facing in 2024 and a compounding $800,000 as it relates to this particular program each year for the next 30 years is incredibly alarming. I still echo that even though we want to do the right thing, we still have to be fiduciarily responsible for not only our generation, but also the generations to come. It is not going to preclude me from voting yes tonight, but I want us to seriously really have a reckoning with regard to our city finances. Our population is shrinking. We need to make sure that we are not having, similar to Mr. Snella, I really appreciate you looking at the positive and unintended consequences as it relates to different policies. That's one of the issues that I fear that we are not looking at in regards to a lot of the policies that we are pushing forward in this city. So I do vote yes, but to the bill sponsor, you need to figure that out before second reader. And I know that you've done a wonderful job on this, incredible due diligence, but you need to figure out the economics of this because we cannot move forward in the city on the backs of Black and brown people if our economics are not in line.
This bill advances on to second reader. Next up, if we could go over the amendments for Council Bill 23-0369.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You can go over the amendments? No testimony. We're in a voting session. I appreciate that. We've had several hearings for folks to come and testify. Tonight, the council has decided that No, not during voting sessions, ma'am. We do not, ma'am. This is a voting session. Please. At this point, we're going to turn it over to Councilwoman Ramos.
So,
How about this? Is there anybody else that has to desperately testify tonight? No, ma'am, we'll give you 2 minutes. Ma'am, we'll give you 2 minutes to come and testify. Ma'am, I'm giving you the opportunity to come and testify.
we're going to lose voters if we do testimony. Chris has to go.
Ma'am, you have to turn on your mic, the button, second button to the right, and then you have 2 minutes. Yeah, we'll come get the papers. Just for the for general housekeeping rules, when we have voting sessions, we do not typically allow. She's not talking to us yet. We typically do not allow folks to come and testify. Obviously, there's been a tremendous amount of testimony on all regards and meetings. At this point, ma'am, if you could please put the council pad back. Ma'am, Ma'am, if you could please put that back there again. Now, at this time, you have 2 minutes to speak. We're going to allow you to speak like we have done in the past, okay? So it's your turn to speak.
Okay. I'm firmly against the inclusionary House bill under the guise of deceptive language. It is actually a quota system, which is against the law as the law of the land of President Lyndon Baines Johnson's Fair Housing Act of 1968, and only exacerbates price gouging that overall is the greedy, no-hold-bar rental market of Baltimore City. It hurts everyone, so people choose to become residents of suburbs, significant portion of population loss. People will not stand to work, have, and start businesses due to you taking away services and force higher income tax. And why this will happen is because this group, Renew Baltimore, is going to get on the ballot and will eliminate over 7 years in the city council charter almost 50% of property taxes. And who doesn't want to pay less taxes? It will pass. So you're going to close, number one, library closures, et cetera, et cetera. What makes people content is being able to move out of poverty and to be able to own their own home. We have 15,000 vacant houses. I'd like to pass this along so people can see the plan that I offered well over a year ago. Every single one of you received it in June 2022, which was after my April 26th testimony. I have this written so you'll be able to, but we need density housing. It says that you're repealing density bonuses. We have to prepare for 3 million people. This is Peter Calthorpe, world-renowned San Francisco-based architect, urban designer, and urban planner who founded Congress for New Urbanism, a Chicago-based advocacy group formed in 1992 that promotes sustainable building practices. This is a quota. A quota means a limited quantity of a particular product which under official controls can be produced, exported, or imported. But inclusion means the practice of policy providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those who have physical or intellectual disabilities and members of other minority groups. But nowhere in these bills have anything to do with physical and intellectual disabilities. These bills in no shape or manner increase equal access to opportunities or resources. For example, lower rental costs does not result in a library being restored. Deliberate Baltimore City decisions stole multi-neighborhood libraries over time. Mount Washington, Locust Point, West Point, Dundalk, Gardenville, Irvington, Pimlico, Fellsport, Keyworth Avenue. You don't add a single thing. The whole thing is the hard work is for every neighborhood to be great to live in. You don't want to do that hard work. I'm doing that hard work and I keep over and over and over. You deny me and deny me, and this plan works. And you know it does. To move people from at least 23% poverty to 5%, but it's probably around 30%. You're destroying. You're
Ma'am,
destroying.
if you can wrap up.
Rent stabilization, rent control, like Tacoma Park, Maryland. Just one more thing. People like to get something for nothing. All they need to say is, I'm gay, and I'll pay $1,000 less rent. How great is that? How disgusting is that, that you want to classify people, you want to keep labels on people. This is what this inclusionary housing is about.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. At this point,
I'm going to pass these along too, because Because
Okay.
I don't want any more people like me, like a pedestrian,
Yes, ma'am.
to be killed.
Okay, thank
What
you.
you took away from me last week for being able to testify.
Thank you, ma'am. Madam Security, if you could turn the microphone off, the button, the red button at the bottom. Thank you so much. At this time, we're going to go into, and is there anybody else that is in need to provide testimony tonight? I want to be fair, completely impartial to what we just heard. Okay, we're going to go back to Councilwoman sponsor of the bill. If you could kind of go over the amendments for 23-0369.
Thank you, Mr. President. So 23-0369 is the tax credit. And the original bill had to be completely redone, not only because we changed the formula from 15% to the cost formula, but also I had inadvertently written it to the wrong part of the code. So amendment number 1 is basically the entire bill. So you'll see the definitions for affordability that we have in the last bill. We have the definitions based on the credit. And let me just back up and say that normally we do not have authority to create a tax credit. The only authority we're using here for this tax credit is the high performance tax credit given to us by the high performance suite of tax credits that's given to us by the tax article to incentivize high performance buildings. High performance means basically green buildings and better performing buildings. So that is very broad language in the state code that allows us to create tax credits. And so we are using that particular piece. Now, normally, again, we'd have to go to the General Assembly to get authority to create a tax credit. So it does have the state bill here. We have the same definitions for the various income levels as well as the type of unit that we're looking for, which is in the first bill as well. We have the goal of the program. On page 3, we have the credit and how the math works. The timing, so the way that the credit is going to work is that once the building is reassessed, so they've built the building, and once the building is reassessed, then the credit is based on that assessment, and so is the high performance inclusionary housing tax credit. Number 3, measures, is basically how this works as I described earlier, which is that the accounting for the calculation between the market rate rent and the rent for those 60% of AMI units would be documented throughout the year. And then the Department of Finance would get a report on January 15th that is all of the accounting of all of the units and the cost. And then that amount would be less that amount on the tax bill. So it's outlined here as well. This can be done through with, obviously matching with other tax credits, which is what the other language says. And then also there's an application that the Department of Finance will put together that's on page 5. And we do have an exclusion here that historic properties would not be included, and then also that this is specifically for the tax credit or the bill that we just voted on. And then the eligibility requirements on page 6. Again, it talks about the period of 30 years throughout the full affordability period. And then there's compliance with the inclusionary bill that we just voted on. And again, in terms of what tax credits it could also be coupled with, that the department on page 7 would come up with all the regulations of how this would work, that there is an annual report, and then also that there is a report every other year that asks for more specific language. And that is the bill. And then amendment number 2 just makes sure that the enactment date is consistent with the previous bill at 180 days.
Are there any questions? At this time, I'll entertain. We're good. I'll entertain a motion to approve the amendments.
Second?
It's been moved and probably second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. At this time, I'll take a motion to approve the bill as amended.
So moved.
It's been moved and probably seconded. Mr. Green, if you could do a roll call.
Councilman Mosby,
Yes.
Councilwoman Middleton,
Yes.
Councilman Bullock. Yes. Councilwoman Ramos,
Yes.
Councilman Cohen. Yes. Councilman Costello, absent. Councilman Dorsey, absent. Councilman Stokes, absent. Councilman Conway. Councilwoman McCray.
Absent.
Councilman Torrance.
Where does that leave us, Mr. Green?
8 yeas.
That's it. Rest absence, right?
7 absent.
All right. So this bill, as amended, is approved, and we'll move on to second reader. As we close out, I would like to thank all that have been involved. I think that this bill has come a long way. You know, I know that the councilwoman, myself, to any questions that council members might have or to the general public might have, we still will be available to help support and try to perfect the bill. There's no perfect bill. There's no perfect process. What I will say is I think all involved, particularly as it relates to the administration and Bob, and I don't know how many discussions you've had with our office and with Councilwoman, to the advocates, to the folks in the development community, I would like to thank you. Obviously, there's been a lot of push to get this bill done as quickly as possible. A year and a half is not an ideal time. However, for things that are as important as this, it takes a while to kind of get that to land the plane. I'm excited where the council is today. I think this is a historic moment for the city of Baltimore. At the look back period at 3 years, we get to really see and evaluate where we are and how we move forward. But I know folks in 17 years will be proud of the work that we've done today, unlike the work that was done that only produced 34 units over the past 17 years. And with that, we'll adjourn the hearing for City Council Bill 22-0195, as well as for City Council Bill 23-0369. Thank you.